In all things, it is best to do tests and to verify your results before proceeding with the final commitment. Yeah? I'm sorry, I have no idea what nationality that accent was supposed to represent. I was aiming for German. So let's take a moment in this video to talk about testing and why you need to test your embroidery files before you make a permanent, life-changing decision like committing it to a sweatshirt and destroying it, or putting it on a priceless family heirloom and completely shredding it. Yeah, we're pros. So I was making an embroidery design for Hatch Embroidery so that they could do a blog featuring me as one of their new partners. And I realized maybe before I hand this file over, I should probably do a test. But they actually wanted some really good high-resolution photos on a garment or a towel, and I was like, well, I don't want to mess any of that up. Plus, since people are going to be downloading this and using it, I really don't want them to send a lot of hate my way if it doesn't even work correctly. So I thought it would be a good idea to reinforce good testing values into my community, while also showing you how I've resolved some of the problems that I actually ran into when I was doing testing. So apart from actually avoiding the major screw up of destroying a priceless family heirloom, there are other really good reasons that you should be focused on doing testing of your designs, or even designs you've purchased from someone else because maybe they were lazy and didn't test. So point number one. A lot of these embroidery software suites are using computer-generated graphics, which means they're just taking the data that you've given it and interpreting it. That means that the representation that you see in the visuals in the application are somewhat close, but they might not look exactly like they're represented in the software once they're stitched out. Point number two, your design is going to look different on different kinds of fabrics. It will not look the same on a towel as it would on a sweatshirt. That's because the towel is going to be a woven and not really stretch out of place as much as a knit fabric like on a sweatshirt. This means that pull compensation is probably going to be different between the two types of fabrics, and so you need to know how it's going to behave in either case. And last but not least, point number three, sizing. I don't know if anybody else listening is like this, but for me, I have a really hard time visualizing size from the computer screen to an actual physical object in physical 3D space. That means that I think I've got it right, and even if I stare at a ruler or a guide, I still can't visualize what that design is going to look like right there in front of me. As I found with this design, I thought that my satin stitching was going to be fine, and then once I stitched it out, I found that a couple of them were actually just a little too small. So let's go look at the design and look at that first test stitch out so I can give you an idea of what it is I messed up and how I fixed it. So here we are in Hatch Embroidery 3. This is the digitizer version, and I used it to create this beautiful little holiday cookie design. Even though it's a really basic design, I still decided that it was going to be best for me to go ahead and do a test stitch out, mostly because I was using some new fill patterns, and I'm always really off on getting the width of my satin stitches correct in the first place. So if we zoom in on the design, you can see I thought that everything was going to be just fine in the stitch out, and those satin stitches were going to be great. Unfortunately, they are actually super small. I'm actually going to hold this up to the camera so you can see in greater detail. And while it doesn't look bad, I really think I could have made some of those lines a little thicker. I also could have made the little parallel dots larger, and I probably should have used a slightly more tan color. They look like flesh cookies. The other thing that you can see is right here in this area, you can see some of the brown in there, and that's because I overlapped those stitches just a bit too much. I personally have never relied just on pull compensation in order to make things overlap correctly because it varies fabric to fabric, as I mentioned earlier in the video. So I do provide a little bit of overlap with layering like this, and you can clearly see the brown. The thing is, I don't want to make those stitches any more dense than they already are. I took it down a little bit just to kind of make sure it was really compact, but if I did it any more, then when I stitch this to like a knit fabric, like a t-shirt or the sweatshirt that I want to do, it's going to pinch and pull it in even more. It's also going to make it really hard for me to do those satin stitches on top of it later. So what I do in the software is I go to that targeted area. I'm just going to kind of set true view off so I can see. So everything has a bit of an overlap. Even down here, I have overlap. But the difference between this overlap and even this over here is that it is super thick. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to hit reshape. There's the button up on the upper left. And then I can actually see all of the little points, and I can start to pull them in a little bit more and make them snug to that border line. So if I zoom in a little more here, this is the edge of what is going to be the lighter tan or flesh tone, as it were. And this edge here and here are actually the brown shadow underneath. Now we're gonna zoom back out because I absolutely cannot work like that. I'm just going to pull these in a little bit. Even if they weren't showing, they are still the same amount of distance away from the edge as the others were. And again, it's okay to have a little bit of overlap like we see over here. Those were fine. The issue is that you don't want to have too much. Now there's a curve here, so I'm going to right click on the edge, and that will give me a curved point that I can then use to make sure that this is hugging the edge. Let's do the same here and here, because I just want it to follow the edge, but not have some areas thicker than others, you know? So we'll pull that, and we'll pull that up, and then we'll pull this back down. And we're gonna look, guys, we're making changes. So let's go back up to the toolbar and turn True View back on so we can just verify that everything looks pretty good and I didn't change anything that's going to be visible on the outside. Now that was the only thing in the shadow region that looked weird, so now we can go and start adjusting the satin stitch width. So if we zoom in on the star cookie first and we select the satin stitch in the middle for that frosting, I think we could thicken that up a bit, so I'm just going to bump it up by 1/100th. So we're going to go from 4/100ths to 5/100ths, and I think that's going to be fine. The other thing is, like, now that I think about it, I really think that these little dots here that are supposed to be all, you know, the little dots of royal icing, I think they're going to be fine. I think that they will definitely stand out better once I'm not using a flesh tone for the cookie. We're going to do that same kind of bump here for the tree. Boop. And see, you know, in here, sometimes I worry about these sections up here, like what they're going to look like in that final stitch out. But again, I will do a second test. There's one other cool feature if you're a Hatch embroidery user that you could use to kind of get a sense of how your stitches are going to go and if your start and ends are at the right place. I personally like to minimize the number of jumps and color changes I'm going to make, so I leverage the player tool in Hatch so that I can understand like what everything's going to look like when it stitches. So if we pop right back into the software real quick, there is the player button up in the toolbar here, and if you click that, it's going to load a player and actually go through all of the stitches from the beginning, and you can watch it stitch out. Now this is going to do an estimate for you. You need to actually dial in the stitches per minute that you're going to be doing if you want to have any kind of accurate understanding of how long this is going to take you to do, but you can also advance the colors. And for me, I just like to scrub the timeline and go wee, so I can see it do all of its cool stuff, and then I have a really good understanding of if I'm doing it correctly or not. Once I'm done being a perfectionist, I can export this and do a second test. And yeah, you should do a second test, especially if you're mucking around with any of the sizing, or especially that overlap when you have those two layers on top of each other. You just don't know how it's going to look, and if you mess up a sweatshirt, you're probably going to be really mad at yourself, especially because it's going to cost a bit. So when I was doing the second test, I thought everything was turning out really well. apart from the fact that I was still using that flesh-colored brown. And here's the thing. Yeah, it does take time to do this, but it's going to cost you a lot less time, frustration, and money if you make sure that everything's going to work before you put this on something a little more permanent. So to me, it looks like that second test was a success. So now I feel confident enough to put it on my $12 sweatshirt. So I'm going to show a portion of this because of the fact that I actually was doing this at 1,000 stitches per minute. I did not speed up this portion of the video. It was flying so fast, it was driving me nuts watching it. The other thing I want to point out is because it's a little bit different, since the sweatshirt material is a little more plush than the test material I was using, I did put a water-soluble stabilizer on top of it. And here we have the final garment. My kid is over the moon excited to wear this to school, which says a lot for a middle schooler. The best part is, I didn't mess up and completely ruin my $12 sweatshirt investment. I hope that this video helped solidify why you need to do all of the testing for anything and everything you ever do, even with other crafts outside of machine embroidery. Feel free to follow my socials where I'll share the Hatch Embroidery blog once it's live. That's where you'll be able to download this design for free and learn a little bit more about me. Also, feel free to check out any of the Black Friday sales that are happening right now for the Ricoma marquee, otherwise known as the MT1501. I'll leave information on that as well as how you can also acquire Hatch Embroidery 3 for yourself. Happy stitching!